Welcome to another video, and after a long time we are back to Red Dead Redemption content, and I might see more RDR videos again. So today we're going to discuss what happened to every gang member after the gang disbanded, and I'll try to rate their career afterwards. Were they still badass or not? Let's start. The first is the leader himself, Dutch. So after the gang disbanded in 1899, Dutch went into hiding for several years, avoiding the law and his former allies. He resurfaced in 1907, leading a new gang of Native Americans and outcasts who were fighting against the U.S. Army and the Bureau of Investigation. He claimed to have a vision of a free and independent society, but he was also driven by revenge and paranoia. Basically, he was going insane. He was reunited with John Marston, who was sent by the government to hunt him down. The Dutch tried to manipulate John into joining his cause, but John refused. Dutch eventually realized that his ideals were corrupted and that he was a relic of the past. He escaped from John and the army by faking his death. But that ain't it. The Dutch reappeared in 1911, leading another gang of outlaws and rebels in the mountains of West Elizabeth. He was still pursued by John Marston, who was forced to work for the government again. Damn that government! The Dutch continued to wage war against the authorities, using a machine gun and explosives to cause chaos and destruction. He also kidnapped and tortured a young woman named Nastus, who was working as an informant for the government. John managed to track down Dutch to his hideout in Cochinay, where he confronted him for the final time. Dutch admitted that he knew that John would never give up on him, and that he was tired of running and fighting. He then committed suicide by throwing himself off a cliff, saying that their time was over. Or was it? In my opinion, Dutch van der Linde's story is a tragic and epic saga of the decline and fall of the Wild West and the rise and triumph of civilization and progress. He represents a failing man who can't keep up with changing times. I would rate his subsequent career a 10 out of 10. I mean, he still didn't lose his nature and became a literal terrorist for the government. He formed another gang and was on the verge of winning if John and his plot armor didn't exist. Next, Pearson. Pearson is one of the few gang members who survived the downfall of the gang and managed to start a new life. He is first introduced in the game as a cheerful and talkative man who loves to share stories about his past as a sailor and a whaler. But as the game progresses, Pearson becomes more disillusioned and unhappy with the gang's situation. He expresses his frustration and regret about living in a swamp, waiting to get shot for riding with outlaws. He also worries about the gang's food supplies, which are often low and insufficient. He is one of the few gang members who does not participate in any of the missions or robberies, and instead stays at the camp to look after the others. You might call him a coward or a sensible man. Both could be true. Pearson's loyalty to Dutch is also tested when he witnesses Dutch's increasingly erratic and violent behavior. He is shocked when Dutch leaves John dead after the train robbery, and when he abandons Arthur and John during the bank heist in St. Denis. He is also disturbed by Dutch's alliance with Micah, whom he dislikes and distrusts. He tries to convince Arthur to leave the gang and start over, but Arthur refuses. In actuality, Pearson's fate is determined by your choice at the end of Chapter 6. If the player chooses to help John escape from the Pinkertons, Pearson will join the other gang members who side with Arthur and John and flee the camp with them. He will later attend Arthur's funeral, along with Charles, Sadie, Rains Fall, and Reverend Swanson. If you choose to go back for the money, Pearson will stay at the camp with Dutch, Micah, Bill, Javier, and Cleet. He will not appear in the final confrontation between Arthur and Micah, and his whereabouts will be unknown. So what really happened to him? In the epilogue, Pearson can be found running the general store in Rhodes, a town in Lemoyne. He has married a woman named Ethel, and seems to be happy and prosperous. He will recognize John if he visits the store and will greet him warmly. He will also share some stories about his life after the gang and ask John about his family and ranch. He will also mention that he occasionally sees Tilly, another former gang member who lives in St. Denis. Pearson's story is one of the most positive and hopeful among the former gang members. He managed to escape the outlaw life and find peace and stability. He also maintained his friendly and optimistic personality and did not hold any grudges or bitterness towards anyone. He is one of the few characters who achieved the American dream of a fresh start and a better future. I would fairly give him 8 out of 10. He never desired much more than a normal life and finally got it. Now, for the biggest hole. Micah. Micah Bell was a ruthless and treacherous hitman who joined the van der Linde gang about 5 months before the events of the game. He claimed he met Dutch when he saved his life in a bar fight over some stolen gold. but he was actually a mole working for the Pinkerton agency who wanted to bring down the gang. Micah was responsible for many of the gang's troubles, such as the failed bank robbery in Blackwater, the massacre in Strawberry, the betrayal of the O'Driscolls, and the murder of several innocent people. He also manipulated Dutch into becoming more paranoid and violent, turning him against his loyal friends like Arthur and John. The Dutch really trusted this idiot more than the guy he was with his entire life. In the final chapter of the game, Micah's true colors were revealed when he shot Susan Grimshaw, who tried to stop him from killing Abigail. He then fought Arthur on the mountain, where he either killed him or left him to die. He also tried to kill John, but the Dutch intervened and stopped him. Micah then fled with the money from the Blackwater robbery, leaving Dutch and the gang behind. 8 years later, in 1907, Micah had formed his own gang, consisting of his old friends Cleet and Joe, and some new recruits. He was hiding on Mount Hagen, a snowy peak in the Grizzlies' west. He was also still in contact with the Dutch, who had joined him at some point. But thankfully, Micah's past caught up with him when John, Sadie, and Charles tracked him down and attacked his hideout. They killed most of his gang members and confronted him at the top of the mountain. There, they also found Dutch, who had a standoff with them. Micah tried to convince Dutch to shoot John and Sadie, but Dutch shot Micah instead, wounding him. John then finished him off with a barrage of bullets, ending his life. John and Sadie then took the money from the Blackwater robbery and left. The Dutch also left without saying a word, leaving Micah's corpse to freeze in the snow. It's poetic, isn't it? So how would I rate Micah's career after the gang disbanded out of 10? Well, we have to give him some credit for surviving for 8 years and forming his own gang, despite being hunted by the law and his former allies. He also managed to keep Dutch by his side, which is no easy feat. However, he also lost everything he had: his reputation, his friends, his money, and his life. He died a lonely and hated man, with no one to mourn him. He also failed to achieve his ultimate goal of escaping the country and living a free life. Therefore, I would give him a 5 out of 10. He was a survivor, but not a winner. Now, we are going to talk about Charles Smith, one of the most loyal and honorable members of the Van der Linde gang. Charles Smith was a half African-American, half Native American outlaw who joined the Van der Linde gang about 6 months before the events of the game. He was a skilled hunter, tracker, fighter, and craftsman who often helped the gang with hunting, scouting, and building. He was also a close friend of Arthur Morgan, the main protagonist of the game. Charles was one of the few members of the gang who realized that Dutch, the leader, was losing his mind and leading them to ruin. He was also one of the few who managed to escape the cycle of violence and death that befell most of the gang. He helped John Marston to build his ranch and start a new life with his family. He also helped Sadie Adler to rescue John's wife and son from the Pinkertons, the agents who were hunting down the remnants of the gang. After John's family was safe, Charles decided to leave America and travel to Canada, where he hoped to find a peaceful life among the natives. He said goodbye to John and Sadie and rode away on his horse. This was the last time we saw him in the game. So, what happened to Charles Smith after he left the gang? Well, there is no official confirmation, but we can make some educated guesses based on the clues and hints in the game and its sequel, Red Dead Redemption. First of all, we can assume that Charles made it to Canada safely, and that he found a tribe that accepted him. Also, we can assume that Charles continued to live as a hunter and a fighter, but in a more honorable and peaceful way. So, based on these assumptions, I can rate Charles Smith's career after the gang disbanded out of 10. I think that he deserves a 9 out of 10 because he was able to break free from the outlaw life. Next up is Bill Williamson, one of the main antagonists of the first game and a major character in the second game. So Bill Williamson was born Marion Williamson in 1866. He was embarrassed by his first name, which was a family name, and later adopted the name Bill. He joined the U.S. Army and fought against Native Americans, but was dishonorably discharged in 1892 for deviancy and attempted murder. He became a drunk and a highway robber until he met Dutch van der Linde in 1893. Dutch saved him from being robbed by a crossdresser and recruited him into his gang, where he taught him his philosophy of living free from the constraints of civilization. Bill was loyal to Dutch and the gang, but he was also insecure, impulsive, and violent. He often clashed with other members, especially John Marston and Arthur Morgan, who saw him as a brute and a fool. He was good at using explosives and guns, but not very good at planning or thinking ahead. He participated in many of the gang's heists and robberies, but also caused trouble for them, such as when he accidentally started a war with the Greys in Rhodes, or when he got captured by the O'Driscolls in Shady Belle. As the gang's situation worsened, Bill became more paranoid and distrustful of everyone, except for Dutch and Micah Bell, who manipulated him into turning against Arthur and John. He sided with the Dutch and Micah during the standoff at Beaver Hollow and escaped with them when the Pinkertons attacked. Bill then formed his own gang, which became notorious in New Austin. He took over Fort Mercer, a former hideout of the Del Lobo gang, and terrorized the region with his band of outlaws. He also allied himself with the Mexican army and helped them fight against the rebels led by Abraham Reyes. He was eventually tracked down by badass John Marston, who was forced by the government to hunt down his former gang members. John confronted Bill at Fort Mercer, but Bill escaped to Mexico with Javier's help. John followed him there, and with the help of Reyes and his men, he stormed the town of Escalera, where Bill was hiding. John finally confronted Bill and shot him dead, ending his career as an outlaw. So, how do we rate Bill Williamson's career out of 10? Well, he was certainly a formidable and feared outlaw who managed to survive for a long time in a harsh and changing world. He was loyal to his leader and his ideals, and he never gave up on his way of life. But he was also a violent and reckless man. He was easily manipulated and betrayed by those he trusted, and he lost everything he cared about in the end. He died without redemption or glory, and his legacy was soon forgotten by history. So that's why I would give him a 4 out of 10. Next is Leopold Strauss, the heartless bookkeeper and loan shark of the van der Linde gang. Leopold Strauss was born in 1846 in Vienna, Austria. He had a very hard childhood, as his father sold his youngest sister into bonded labor and his brother became a petty criminal. He was sent to the United States with his uncle, who died of a heart attack during the New York City draft riots of 1863. He survived by running scams and eventually joined Dutch van der Linde's gang, where he became the accountant and the loan sharking business manager. Strauss was a cold and ruthless man who exploited the poor and desperate by lending them money with high interest rates and harsh terms. He didn't care about the consequences of his actions, as he saw his debtors as nothing more than numbers. He also showed little loyalty or compassion to his fellow gang members, as he often lied to them or manipulated them for his own benefit. Strauss played a major role in the downfall of the gang, as his loan sharking missions led to many troubles and tragedies. One of his debtors, Thomas Downs, infected Arthur Morgan with tuberculosis, a fatal disease that slowly killed him. Another debtor, Arthur Londonderry, was killed by the Pinkertons, who used his wife as bait to lure the gang into a trap. Strauss also betrayed John Marston by giving his location to the Pinkertons, hoping to save himself from arrest. Arthur Morgan, who despised Strauss and his methods, finally had enough of him and kicked him out of the gang in the Beaver Hollow chapter. He told him to never come back and warned him that he would kill him if he ever saw him again. Strauss was left alone in the wilderness, with no money, no friends, and no protection. So what happened to Strauss after he was exiled from the gang? Well, according to the epilogue, he was captured by the Pinkertons and tortured for information about the remaining gang members. He refused to talk, however, and died in custody. His death was reported in a newspaper article, which John Marston could read in 1907. How would I rate Strauss's career after his exile? I would give him a 2 out of 10. He lost everything he had worked for, and he died a miserable and lonely death. He may have shown some courage and loyalty by not betraying the gang, but that doesn't make up for all the harm and suffering he caused others. He was a greedy and heartless man who deserved his fate. Now finally, John. He joined the gang when he was 12 years old after running away from an orphanage. He became close friends with Arthur Morgan and fell in love with Abigail Roberts, another gang member. They had a son named Jack, who was born in 1895. Arthur helped John escape from the gang and reunite with his family while sacrificing himself to distract the Pinkertons. John and his family moved to different locations, trying to start a new life as ranchers. But they were still haunted by their past, and John struggled to find a stable income and a peaceful home. He eventually settled at Beecher's Hope, a ranch in West Elizabeth, with the help of his old friends Sadie Adler and Charles Smith. He also built a house and a barn, and he proposed to Abigail. But like every anti-hero story, John's past caught up with him in 1911, when he was blackmailed by the government agent Edgar Ross, who kidnapped his wife and son. Ross forced John to hunt down and kill the remaining members of the van der Linde gang, including Javier Escuela, Bill Williamson, and Dutch himself. John managed to complete his task but was betrayed by Ross, who sent a squad of soldiers to kill him at his ranch. John fought bravely, but was ultimately gunned down in front of his barn. His death was avenged by his son Jack, who killed Ross in 1914. So how would I rate John Marston's career after the gang disbanded out of 10? Well, it's hard to give a definitive answer since his career was not very consistent or successful. On one hand, he tried to redeem himself and become a better person, a better husband, and a better father. He also showed courage and loyalty and made some friends along the way. On the other hand, he was constantly chased by his enemies and his guilt, and he never really escaped his violent nature. He also failed to protect his family and himself, and he died a tragic death. I would say that John Marston's career after the gang disbanded deserves a 7 out of 10. He had some good moments, but also some bad ones. He was a complex and flawed character who made some mistakes, but also made some sacrifices. He was a hero, but also an anti-hero. He was a legend, but also a victim. What do you think of John Marston's career after the gang disbands? Do you agree with my rating? Let me know in the comments below. Let's get done with Abigail too. Abigail's story is a tragic one, as she goes from being a member of a notorious outlaw gang to a struggling rancher trying to escape her past, only to lose her husband and die of unknown causes. Abigail Roberts was born in 1877 as an orphan. She grew up in dive bars and brothels in the West and became a prostitute at a young age. She joined the Van der Linde gang in 1894 after being introduced by Uncle, a fellow gang member. She slept with most of the gang members, but eventually fell in love with John Marston. That's debatable, though. She gave birth to their son Jack when she was only 18, and later had a daughter who died. John temporarily left the gang for a year when Jack was around 1, but returned later. The gang was a family for Abigail, and she enjoyed the freedom and excitement of the outlaw life. Abigail was loyal to Dutch, but she also cared for John and Jack, and wanted them to be safe and happy. She often argued with John about his involvement in the gang and urged him to leave with her and Jack. She also worried about Jack's future and tried to teach him how to read and write. She was supportive of Arthur Morgan, another of Dutch's protégés, who became disillusioned with Dutch and helped John and his family escape from the gang. Abigail's career after the gang disbanded was not very successful or fulfilling. She and John tried to start a new life as ranchers, working for various people and saving money to buy their own land. However, they were constantly haunted by their pasts and had to deal with various enemies and obstacles. Abigail was kidnapped by Andrew Milton, a Pinkerton agent, who tried to use her as leverage to get John to surrender. Abigail was angry and scared and left John with Jack, but returned later when John finished his task. However, their happiness was short-lived, as John was betrayed by the Bureau and killed by a group of soldiers at their ranch. Abigail buried John and vowed to raise Jack as a good man. She died in 1914, of unknown causes, and was buried next to John. So how would I rate Abigail's career after the gang disbanded out of 10? Well, I would give it a 5 out of 10. Abigail had a hard and tragic life, and she never really achieved her dreams or found lasting happiness. She was always on the run, in danger, or in grief. She lost her husband, her daughter, and many of her friends. Sad stuff. Now it is time for the third member, Jack Marston. As you may recall, Jack Marston was born in 1895 as the first child of John and Abigail Marston. He grew up around the various outlaws of the gang, who tried to shield him from their more nefarious actions. However, Jack's childhood was far from stable, as he witnessed many traumatic events, such as being kidnapped by the Braithwaite family and Angelo Bronte, losing his father to government agents, and avenging his death by killing Edgar Ross. So what did Jack do after he buried his father and rode away from the Ross family's ranch? Did he follow in his father's footsteps and become an outlaw, or did he find a different path in life? According to some fan theories, Jack Marston moved back to West Elizabeth sometime between 1915 and 1920. He became a writer and published several books, including one titled Red Dead, which was a fictionalized account of his father's life and adventures. He also wrote a book called The Last Enemy That Shall Be Destroyed, which was a reference to the final mission of the first game, where John Marston made his last stand against the government agents. This is just a theory because he liked books, and there was no need to continue as a gunman in changing times. He was also pretty young, so he might have fought in the war. Next, Karen. Karen Jones was a known scam artist who joined the gang after meeting Dutch van der Linde in a saloon. She was a skilled con woman who often used her charm and wit to lure unsuspecting victims into traps. She was also a good shot and a loyal friend to the other gang members, especially Sean McGuire, with whom she had a romantic relationship. Things took a turn for the worse for Karen after Sean was killed by the Gray family during a failed robbery in Rhodes. Karen was devastated by his death, and she blamed herself for not being there to save him. She started to drink heavily to cope with her grief and guilt, and she became more aggressive and depressed as the gang moved to Beaver Hollow. Karen's drinking problem worsened as the gang fell apart due to Dutch's paranoia and Micah's influence. She was often seen drunk and passed out in the camp, and sometimes she wandered off into the woods. She also lost interest in participating in any of the gang's activities and even refused to join the final bank heist in St. Denis, saying that she had a bad feeling about it. Karen's fate after the gang broke up is unclear, as she is never seen or mentioned again in the game. However, there are some clues and theories that suggest what might have happened to her. One of them is a letter that Tilly Jackson, another former gang member, wrote to John Marston in the epilogue. In the letter, Tilly says that she heard that Karen drank herself to death and that she was sorry for not being able to help her. Sad stuff. 3 out of 10. Next, Javier. Javier Escuela was born in Mexico in 1873. He became a bounty hunter and a revolutionary, fighting against the corrupt system of his country. He fell in love with a woman, but had to flee to America after killing a former military man who wanted her. He was starving and desperate when he met Dutch van der Linde, who offered him a place in his gang. Javier's loyalty to Dutch was tested when Arthur and John confronted him about his madness and paranoia. Javier sided with the Dutch and fought against his former friends. He was wounded by Arthur in the final standoff at Beaver Hollow and escaped with Dutch and Micah Bell, the gang's traitor. He then left America and returned to Mexico, where he became a hitman for Colonel Agustin Allende, a ruthless dictator who oppressed the people. In 1911, John Marston, who had survived the events of 1899 and was forced by the government to hunt down his former gang members, tracked down Javier in Mexico. He found him defending Bill Williamson, another former gang member, at Fort Mercer. John stormed the fort with the help of a local rebel leader named Abraham Reyes and confronted Javier. Depending on the player's choice, John can either kill Javier or capture him and hand him over to the authorities. Well, he became a mercenary for a tyrant and lost his honor and his friends. He betrayed the ideals that he once fought for, and he died or was imprisoned as a criminal. But he still had a great run nonetheless, 7 out of 10. Next, Tilly. Let's recap her life, shall we? Tilly Jackson was born to a former slave mother and an unknown father. When she was 12 years old, she was kidnapped by a gang called the Foreman Brothers, who abused her and forced her to become an outlaw. She eventually killed one of them, Malcolm Foreman, who tried to rape her, and escaped the gang. She then returned to her mother's workplace, only to find out that she had died. She was later found by Dutch van der Linde, who saved her from trouble and took her under his wing. He taught her how to read and write and gave her a sense of family and belonging. Tilly became a loyal member of the van der Linde gang and participated in several robberies and heists with them. She was also close friends with other female members of the gang, such as Mary Beth, Karen, and Susan. The van der Linde gang faced more troubles, such as the betrayal of Micah Bell, the death of Josiah Matthews, the capture of John Marston, and the pursuit of the Pinkerton agents. Tilly witnessed the gang falling apart as Dutch became more paranoid and violent, and some members left or died. She also saw Arthur's health deteriorating as he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Tilly decided to leave the gang with Arthur's help, along with Mary Beth and Susan. She said goodbye to Arthur, and she thanked him for everything he had done for her. She also told him to look after himself and hoped that he would find peace. She then boarded a train to St. Denis, where she planned to start a new life. 8 years later, in 1907, Tilly was married to a lawyer named Mr. Pierre and had a daughter. She lived in a nice house in St. Denis and was happy and prosperous. She met John Marston again, who had also left the outlaw life and settled down with his family. They had a friendly conversation, and Tilly told John that she was proud of him. She also asked him about Arthur, and she said that she owed him everything. She then invited John to visit her anytime and wished him well. Well, she was one of the few who managed to escape the outlaw life and start a new one. She found love, happiness, and success, and never looked back. She also kept her friendship with John and honored Arthur's memory. I would rate her career after the gang disbanded a 10 out of 10 because she achieved everything she wanted and deserved. Uncle. Uncle is a very old man who claims to have had many adventures in his life. Maybe he is Red Harlow. Just kidding. But most of them are probably lies or exaggerations. He suffers from a chronic condition called lumbago, which causes him severe back pain and makes him lazy and useless. He is also a heavy drinker and a compulsive gambler. He joined the Van der Linde gang at some point in the past, but no one knows exactly when or why. Uncle is not a very skilled or loyal outlaw. He rarely participates in the gang's missions, and when he does, he often messes up or complains. After the Van der Linde gang disbands in 1899, following a series of tragic events, Uncle goes into hiding for a while. He reappears in 1907 when he meets John Marston outside of a bank in Blackwater. John is trying to start a new life with his wife Abigail and his son Jack after being forced by the government to hunt down and kill his former gang members. Uncle convinces John to buy a ranch in Beecher's Hope, and he helps him build it with the help of two other former gang members, Sadie Adler and Charles Smith. Uncle becomes a part of the Marston family, living with them and working on the ranch. Uncle's career after the gang disbanded is not very impressive or successful. He does not achieve anything remarkable or meaningful except for helping John build his ranch and his family. He does not change or grow as a person, remaining the same old drunken liar he always was. He dies as he lived, a lowlife and a clown. 3 out of 10. Mary Beth. Mary Beth Gaskell was a young woman who joined the gang as a thief and a con artist. She was kind, good-natured, and a bookworm who dreamed of becoming a writer. She had a close relationship with Arthur Morgan, the main protagonist of the game, and often comforted him during his illness. Mary Beth was one of the few gang members who managed to escape the chaos and violence that ensued after the gang's downfall. She left the gang before the final confrontation at Beaver Hollow, along with Tilly Jackson and Susan Grimshaw. She told Arthur that she was going to look for a new life in New York. In the epilogue, set 8 years later, John Marston, another former gang member, encounters Mary Beth at the train station in Valentine. She reveals that she has become a successful novelist under the pen name Leslie DuPont. She has written several books, including one based on her experiences with the gang. Mary Beth's fate is one of the most positive and satisfying ones in the game, as she was able to achieve her dreams and find happiness. I would rate her career after the gang disbanded as a 10 out of 10 because she fulfilled her potential as a writer and a person. She also avoided the tragic endings that befell most of the other gang members, such as death, imprisonment, or betrayal. Josiah is next. Josiah Trelawney was a master of deception who could charm his way out of any situation. He joined the Van der Linde gang after saving Dutch's life and became a valuable asset for the gang's operations. He often provided information, contacts, and opportunities for the gang, but he also disappeared frequently, leaving the gang to wonder about his true motives and loyalty. Trelawney had a wife and 2 sons who lived in Saint Denis. He claimed to love them dearly, but he also lied to them about his occupation and whereabouts. He told them that he was a traveling salesman who sold exotic goods from faraway lands. In reality, he was involved in various illegal schemes, such as gold prospecting, horse stealing, and gambling. Trelawney was a smooth talker who could manipulate anyone with his words and charisma. He was also skilled at magic tricks, such as making a gun turn into a bird or making a coin disappear. He used these skills to distract, confuse, and impress his targets, as well as to escape danger. Trelawney was not a violent man, and he preferred to avoid confrontation and bloodshed. He often relied on his wit and cunning to get out of trouble, rather than his weapons. He was also not very loyal to the gang, and he cared more about his own interests and survival. He did not share the gang's ideals or vision, and he was not willing to risk his life for them. Trelawney eventually decided to leave the gang for good after realizing that the gang was falling apart and that Dutch was losing his mind. He packed his bags and quietly left the camp after getting Arthur's blessing. He thanked Arthur for being such a good friend, and he wished him well. Trelawney's fate after leaving the gang is unknown, but it is presumed that he returned to his family in Saint Denis. He probably continued his career as a con artist. He may have also changed his identity and appearance to avoid being recognized by the law or his enemies. Trelawney was one of the most intriguing and mysterious characters in the Red Dead Redemption series. I would give him 6 out of 10 for not much information. Next up is Swanson. C. Reverend Swanson was a man who struggled with many demons, such as alcoholism, sex addiction, and loss of faith. He was married to a woman named Margaret, who was already married to another man, making him a bigamist. The law caught up with them in San Francisco, and she fled to Shanghai, leaving him heartbroken. He then joined the Van der Linde gang, where he was mostly tolerated but not respected by the other members. He often got into trouble due to his drunkenness and gambling habits, and he had to be rescued by Arthur Morgan on several occasions. During the events of the game, Swanson witnessed the downfall of the gang as the Dutch became more paranoid and violent, and the Pinkertons closed in on them. He was one of the few members who realized that the gang was doomed and decided to leave before it was too late. He told Arthur that he was a changed man and that he had found his calling again. He boarded a train to New York, where he hoped to start a new life. According to a newspaper article that can be found in the epilogue, Swanson did indeed succeed in his new career. He became the minister of the First Congregational Church of New York and gained a large following of loyal parishioners. He also wrote a book titled The Light of the Lord, which was a bestseller. He was interviewed by a reporter who asked him about his past. Swanson admitted that he had made many mistakes, but that he had been forgiven by God and that he wanted to help others find their way to salvation. He also mentioned that he owed his life to a man named Dutch van der Linde, whom he described as a great leader and a dear friend. He said that he hoped to see him again someday and that he prayed for him every night. So, that's the story of Reverend Swanson, one of the few characters who had a happy ending in Red Dead Redemption 2. How would I rate his career after the gang disbanded out of 10? I would give him a 9/10 because he achieved a lot of success and happiness, unlike our main guy. Next, Sadie. Sadie Adler was born in 1874 and grew up in a harsh environment, learning to hunt and ride horses. In 1896, she married Jake Adler, a rancher, and they lived happily in Ambarino. However, their peaceful life was shattered when the O'Driscoll boys, a rival gang, raided their home and killed Jake. Sadie hid in the cellar for days, until she was rescued by Dutch van der Linde, Arthur Morgan, and Micah Bell, members of the van der Linde gang, who were looking for supplies. Sadie joined the gang, seeking revenge on the O'Driscolls and a new purpose in life. Sadie proved to be a loyal, brave, and skilled member of the gang, participating in many missions and fights. She also developed a close friendship with Arthur, who helped her cope with her grief and anger. Sadie was not afraid of anything or anyone, and often acted impulsively and recklessly, putting herself and others in danger. She also had a strong sense of justice and morality, and did not agree with some of the gang's actions, especially those of Micah, who was secretly working for the Pinkertons, the lawmen who were hunting the gang. As the gang started to fall apart due to internal conflicts, betrayals, and deaths, Sadie remained loyal to Dutch, hoping that he would lead them to a better future. However, she also realized that the gang's way of life was doomed and that they had to find a new path. After the gang disbanded, Sadie became a bounty hunter, using her skills and experience to track down and capture criminals. She also kept in touch with John, who settled down with his wife Abigail and son Jack, and helped him build his ranch in Beecher's Hope. Sadie offered John a job as her partner, but he declined, preferring a peaceful life. Sadie also helped John avenge Arthur's death by killing Micah, who had a large bounty on his head. After that, Sadie decided to leave the country and travel to South America, where she hoped to find a new adventure and a new life. Sadie's fate after leaving America is unknown, but it is possible that she continued her career as a bounty hunter or found another way to make a living. She may have also found love again or remained single, depending on her preferences. She was one of the few members of the gang who managed to survive and adapt to the changing world, and who did not lose her sense of self. I would rate Sadie's career after the gang disbanded as a 9 out of 10 because she was successful, respected, and free. She did what she loved and what she was good at. Fair enough in my book. So yeah, we are done. Yeah, I didn't include characters who were killed during Gang's run because they wouldn't fit in this video. What do you think about this video, and which character was your personal favorite? Except for the protagonists like John and Arthur? Let me know in the comments, and I shall see you in the next Take Care, and have a nice day.